Big thanks to the organizers, especially Professor Arya, who gave me this opportunity to discuss some of the fundamentals of multiphase reactors or modeling of multiphase reactors. So what I'm going to talk about here is the modeling of hydrodynamics of multiphase reactors. So So we see, if we see around us everywhere, there are multi-phase flows present, and multi-phase flows can be defined by saying that any flow which has more than one phases can be a multi-phase flow. So we know generally three phases: gas, liquids, and solids. And so any combination of this liquid and vapor of the same material or same substance, or gas and liquid, so different materials, or even liquid-liquid combinations to immiscible liquids can be treated as multiphase. Then you have gas solid, all liquid solid, and gas liquid solid. So we see around us bubbles, droplets, and particles, all of these suspended in a gas medium, or bubbles, for example, in a liquid medium, or particles in a liquid medium. So there are a lot of examples from our day-to-day life. If we look at, say, from the morning when we start, take tea, that is a multi-phase flow phenomena. We cook food, that is a multi-phase phenomena. Or taking showers, so we have atomization happening, or the spray, there we have multi-phase flow phenomena. If we take a bottle and emptying the bottle, just turn it around, then that is also that's where we see that the liquid flows down and the gas entrains inside. So that is also multi-phase phenomena. Drying of a droplet, when let us say one droplet, it drops down to a surface, and after some time we see a coffee ring effect, that the solid particles will be on the ring of it. So that is also a multi-phase phenomenon. These days we are talking about COVID-19, and COVID-19, lot of the guiding principles are governed by multi-phase phenomena. For example, the magic number of 6 feet, it comes that when somebody sneezes, or when somebody releases some particle, when somebody speaks, the fluid comes out with a certain velocity, and with the fluid, that is, there are flow of two phases. We all know that when we speak, the air comes out of it. Air comes out of our mouth, but along with it, the droplets also come out. Now, droplets of saliva come out. These droplets, the size of this droplet will determine the distance. That the distance these droplets can travel, that determines that what is the distance that should be safe, that the infection does not happen. And that was a very old paper, I think 1930s or 1935, where people looked at, actually an epidemiologist looked at that what is the safe distance. It was it was purely based on fluid dynamics phenomena, and he looked at that how much distance can the particle travel. And two things can happen: either the particle can go and deposit on a surface, or it can evaporate. Before depositing on a surface, it can get evaporated and remain suspended in air. So that is the thing that we talk about, that when somebody says that the virus remains in the air for quite some time, and that is determined by that the particle that is being released by somebody's mouth, by a patient's mouth, that how much distance will it travel and what is the fate of this particle. Okay, so coming to a chemical engineering applications, we have a number of reactors where multi-phase flow happens. So we will look at some of the examples of these reactors. But before we do that, I would like to give a distinction between the two. Okay, so that the multi-phase flows, by looking at, it can be, we can divide into two main categories: separated flows and dispersed flows. So separated flow is where we have two distinct phases. For example, flow of gas liquid in a pipe. And in that case, what will happen that if at a certain gas and liquid flow rates, the liquid will be at the bottom and gas will be at the top. That is because of buoyancy if the pipe is horizontal. So there are two phases, but they are separated from each other. So this is what we call separated flow. And the very common examples that we see in our day-to-day life or in chemical engineering applications are stratified flow or annular flow. So in annular flow, we have a liquid film surrounding the pipe, or liquid film in the pipe which is on the wall, and at the center we have a gas core. So that is annular flow. Now dispersed flow is basically, we have two phases, that one is continuous phase and another one is dispersed phase. So in the continuous phase, let us say if the continuous phase is gas, and the dispersed phase can be either solid particles or can be droplets. So for example, spray drying, an example of where you have a continuous gas phase, and in the continuous gas phase you have droplets coming into, and these droplets, atomization happens and then they gets dried. When they get dried, there is solid. So in the gas phase, you can have droplets, you can have solids, or fluidized bed reactor. So in the fluidized bed reactor, you have a gas phase, and in the gas phase there are solid particles suspended into it. Then another example can be liquid is the continuous phase, and in this liquid you have solid particles suspended into it. So the examples can be, say, bubble column reactor. So in the continuous liquid medium, you have bubbles coming up. Another example, in liquid solid, you can have, say, trickle bed reactor. There are solid particles in the liquid medium. Okay, so in this talk, we will mainly focus on fluid medium, so it can be gas liquid or liquid systems. So let us look at some of the multi-phase reactors that we commonly use in chemical industry. So first one I have listed here is bubble column reactor. So we all know what is a bubble column reactor. Is this okay, I cannot use probably pointer in this mode. But yeah. What I will do, I will share my screen. So in that case, I can use the pointer and that will be convenient. So I will be just taking a small break and then.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so in the bubble column reactors, we basically have a liquid column. This may be the liquid may be in batch mode, or it can be in the continuous mode. And in this, a gas phase is introduced at the bottom using a distributor, gas distributor, or what we call a sparger. And because of buoyancy, these bubbles go up. And what will happen? The bubbles will go up, rise, and then some of the gas will go up, but the liquid will start recirculating. So there will be recirculating motion caused by the flow of bubbles. So you get mixing because of this. There are different variants that are being used in the industry. One of the variations can be that the liquid phase may be in batch mode, or it can be in continuous mode. They can be in co-current or counter-current mode. It can also have three phase. So for example, a catalyst particles also can come in there. So you call it slurry bubble column. One of the advantages of this reactor is that there is no moving parts. So the shear rate is small, and in some cases, especially in biochemical engineering, where the organisms should not be destroyed because of the high shear rate, it is pretty useful. And it is used so I've listed down some typical reactions where it is conventionally used: oxidation, hydrogenation, chlorination, carboxylation, and Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. Okay. Because the mixing is good, so it gives the temperature control is easy, and you can achieve uniform temperature inside the reactor. Now, depending on the flow rates, depending on the column diameter and the gas velocity, you may get different flow regimes in the reactor. So what I have listed here on the left-hand side is a flow regime map, where on the x-axis is column diameter and on the y-axis is gas velocity. So in small columns below say 10 centimeter, at higher gas velocities, what we achieve is slug flow regime. So small bubbles, and then they coalesce and become channel size bubbles, because the channel size is small, about up to 10 centimeters, and these bubbles become large, and this is called slugs. So they act like a piston, and the liquid between them move faster. Then at low velocities, what we get is low gas velocities. What we get is what is called homogeneous bubble flow regime. So homogeneous is this is a perfect regime. What is shown here, that all the bubbles are of same size. Whereas if the gas velocity is increased further, the bubbles starts coalescing and breaking up. So there is a fairly good size distribution, and you will have imperfect bubbly or bad bubbly flow. At higher gas velocities, especially in large columns, what we get is churn turbulent regime, where we will get large size bubbles, small bubbles, and there is a lot of turbulence generated because of bubble. So that was bubble column reactor. Now, every chemical engineer is familiar with what we call CSTRs. So CSTRs is continuously state tank, but I have written here a state tank because you can use tanks either in a batch mode or in a continuous mode. So so these are very useful equipments in the chemical industry, and they are used very widely in chemical and pharmaceutical industries. They can be used for physical processes, for non-reactive processes, or as well as to carry out reactions. So there in the physical process, the goal might be just to achieve agitation, whereas in chemical processes, one would like to have perfect mixing so that the concentration is same throughout the reactor. Now, it has a moving part, which is impeller, and depending on the impeller, so one of the very commonly used impeller is Daston turbine, which provide radial flow, and then pitched blade turbine, where the axial flow is dominant, and then there are new impellers where which can provide both mixed which can provide radial as well as axial flows. So these can be single phase, or these can be two phase or three phase. So in this case, because we are talking mostly about multi-phase flows, so you can have gas coming into a state tank reactor, or gas and solid in the state tank reactor. So the other important part of the reactors is these baffles here, what I have shown in by blue rectangles. So if you stir a fluid in a vessel, you get to see a center vortex, but that vortex does a lot of harm. So to destroy that vortex, we have baffles in the reactor. So for a gas liquid state tank reactor, we will again get a different flow regimes. What I have drawn here are three different typical regimes which are obtained. Is flooded regime, which is that the bubbles are concentrated near the impeller rod in the impeller region itself. In the loaded regime, the bubbles are distributed above the impeller everywhere. And in the completely dispersed, the bubbles are distributed in the entire reactor or in the entire liquid regime. And these flow regimes will depend on two factors. One is the speed of or the RPM of impeller, or it can depend also on the gas flow rate. So these two arrows shows that if you increase the gas flow rate, then the regime changes from completely dispersed to flooded, or other way around on increasing RPM. So the third one is a recent reactor, what is called micro reactor, but it has become very popular in say recent years. So it can be used. It is also widely being used by chemists. What is called say a new branch of chemistry, what is called flow chemistry. It is used in a lot of biological applications for lab on a chip devices, and in microfluidics, say for carrying out some typical reactions which are suited to be done in micro reactors. So a micro reactor. Now they have a lot of applications or a lot of potential to convert the processes in pharmaceutical industry or fine chemical industries, where one cannot afford to destroy or waste the chemicals because the chemicals are very costly. So they are the best suited candidates for continuing or for converting the processes from batch mode to continuous mode. And there are some companies in India as well as world over that they are taking up these projects to convert the processes in the pharmaceutical industry from batch mode to continuous mode. We already know as a chemical engineer that what are the advantages of converting a process from batch mode to the continuous mode. Now, these micro reactors, they are also a very good tool for process intensification, so increasing the performance of the reactor. Generally, they can be defined while we call it micro reactor, but the scale, it depends on the size. So the reactors of millimeter scale, they are also called micro reactors. You can argue that why do we call it micro reactor? So one is that they handle micron or 10 raised to the power minus 6 of that order of volume of fluid, or the micro here refers to smaller scales where the small scale effects start coming into picture. So what are those small scale effects? If we look at surface area to volume ratio or surface area density, so they will typically be L square over L cube, right? So that will be L raised to the power minus 1. Now, the processes, for example, heat and mass transfer rates, they are they also depend on surface area. So the rate of heat and mass transfer can increase the heat transfer performance and mass transfer performance can be very good in these reactors. So the reactions which are, say, mass transfer limited, or where handling highly exothermic reactions, handling large amount of heat being generated in the reaction is very challenging in the large reactions. So for such cases, one can use microreactors.
Hello. Hello.
Sorry, I got disconnected. So
Yeah. That's what I thought actually. No problem.
even internet sometimes fluctuates here. So
Not the sometime, most of the time. So we are going to 5G side, and still we cannot connect properly. Actually, yeah, that we can talk later. You can.
yeah, okay. So I will continue. So in these microreactors, the velocity scales are small, length scales are small. So the flow is laminar, and when the flow is laminar, then you can model these systems very easily. So as a modeling person, I am very happy about it. But there will be a problem, because in all the reactors that we talk about, or in the conventional reactors, large size reactors, the flow is generally turbulent. When the flow is turbulent, you don't need additional means of mixing, because their turbulence, the ADs present of different length scales. It provides a lot of mixing, and you don't need additional means of mixing in most of the cases. But in microreactors, one of the challenges, so if you look at the research in microsystems, or in, say, chemical microprocessing, there's a lot of work being done on designing different micro mixers where one can achieve good mixing. Okay, so but at the same time, when the flow is not turbulent, then it provides an opportunity to have very good control over the system. The safety is enhanced. Exothermic reactions can be done because the heat transfer, heat control, the heat removal rates that one can achieve are very high. And of course, waste is minimized because you are handling low volumes. Okay, so then somebody can come and say, okay, you are talking about micro reactors. So if you do micro reactors, how do you scale up? When you scale up, it will be large reactors. So the concept of scaling up in micro reactors, it becomes what is called numbering up. What I have shown here is a image from Heattrick. So Heattrick is a company, part of say Magatus Aerospace, which is a UK company. So they develop such heat exchangers, which they call printed circuit heat exchangers. So what do? They etch using etching or new manufacturing techniques in on a metal plate. They etch these micro reactors. These generally are not the straight paths but tortuous paths. So when you flow fluid in tortuous paths, because of that, if you take one cross section, so if I draw a cross section of this pipe here, one will get mixing normal to the streamwise direction. So there will be flow, the flow in this direction, but apart from that, there will be mixing in the transverse direction. So you get good mixing into it. So that is one way of, if you change the geometry of the channel, so you get passive mixing. Now, once you, so there are number of channels in this reactor or in this heat exchanger. So one thing is that in one plate itself, you can etch say 100 channels, and then a number of such plates, say about 100 such plates are diffusion bonded together. And what we see is, because this is a heat exchanger, so in this case, the blue and red colors, they signify hot and cold fluid. So the hot and cold fluid, they flow through alternate channels and the heat transfer happens. And many of such heat exchangers has been used or has been deployed in field, especially in the petroleum industry, where say for example offshore, where one would like to have minimum volume and maximum performance, one would like to reduce the weights. Same in the aerospace industry, where one would like to take as minimum possible weight, as good performance as much possible. So these microsystems are very useful from that perspective, and one can do scaling up. So if I talk about gas liquid flow in such systems, and if I take a small a capillary and make the flow happen in such a capillary, gas liquid flow, what we see is different flow regimes. If you introduce gas in a continuous liquid medium, then initially what you will get is a flow of bubbles. So what you see is what is called bubbly flow. Small size bubbles, they are dispersed in a continuous liquid medium. If you increase the gas flow rate further or reduce the liquid velocity, then what we see that these small bubbles, they start coalescing and make larger bubbles. We also saw such bubbles in bubble column reactors, but there they had the shape was not so regular. In this case, what we get is a capsular bubble, a long cylindrical bubbles with hemispherical caps, and these bubbles are called Taylor bubbles, after G.I. Taylor, who studied these bubbles in 1960s. So the flow of Taylor bubbles, one can get over a large range of gas and liquid velocities or flow rates. Then if you increase the gas velocity further, the bubbles will start elongating. So these bubbles will become larger and larger, and the liquid in between them, that will reduce. So eventually at one flow rate, the bubbles will start coming into contact, and you will see a lot of transient phenomena. Sometimes you will see a very long gas bubble, sometimes you see these bubbles merging together and making continuous gas stream. So this is what is called slug annular or Taylor annular flow regime. And you see a lot of large waves on the liquid film. Now, if you increase the gas velocity further, you get nearly smooth gas core and a liquid film surrounding it. Now, there will be some waves on it, but there will be low amplitude waves. So this is called annular flow regimes. If you are working in, say, large gas and liquid velocities, then one may get churned and dispersed flow regime, which is highly transient and turbulent, and one may not want to work in that regime because the advantage of The control of the system is gone there. So if you see a lot of reactions that happen in microreactors, people talk a lot about Taylor flow regimes and sometimes in annular flow regime where there are when they want to have very thin films. Okay. So if we look at in all these systems, we talked about three systems: a bubble column reactor, a microreactor, and a state tank reactor. There's a lot of complexity. You have different phases, and there are a lot of interaction between phases. There can be interaction between continuous and dispersed phase. Dispersed phase, so two bubbles interact, they coalesce, they break up, they merge together. Then the shape of these particles or the shape of the bubbles or droplets, they are not necessarily spherical, and they change with time. So irregular particle shapes. The size of the bubbles also not monodispersed. So that means that the size of the bubble is not only one size bubbles. You get a lot of different size of bubbles. So there's large size distribution of bubbles. Now, because when you talk about these systems, say for example, annular flow regime is a separated flow regime, and if you talk about a bubbly flow regime, this is a dispersed flow regime. So when you would like to model, the approach that you will take will be different. So modeling the transition, which is again a very transient phenomena or very unsteady phenomena, so that is also again a challenge. Now, apart from this, you will have also contact line. So contact line, if you have a solid surface, and if you put a droplet on this solid surface, so there's a liquid droplet and a gas phase and a solid surface. So on this surface, you have three-phase contact. So this is the contact line. Now, with our natural or with our training in fluid mechanics, we always think about that there is no slip boundary condition on the solid surface. So if you take a droplet on your hand and if you blow it up, it will start moving. So when it will start moving, that means will this also move? The contact line will move because the droplet is moving. So the no slip boundary condition, because we were talking about that at the wall, at solid surface, this is the velocity is 0, gas side the velocity is 0, but the contact line moves. So there is a singularity here. So this, how do you model this contact line singularity? That is also again a challenge if you are looking at very small length scales. Then you have multiple length and time scales. So if you want to model of a bubble which will be of the size of 1 mm, and if you are looking at a bubble column reactor size say a few centimeters, it can be say more than 20 centimeter to 1 meter. So in such cases, what you are looking at, that in such a small system or in such a large system where the size of your column is of the order of few hundred meter cubes, there you are looking at a droplet of size or a bubble of size 1 mm, of radius 1 mm. So you have there are number of length and time scales in the system, and if you want to model it heuristically, or if you want to model it from the fundamental principles, it is very time consuming. You need very powerful computers, and then also you will be able to model only a small system. So one example what I have listed here, that say in upstream petroleum engineering, if one is looking to model the reservoirs, the flow in reservoirs, then what is happening at the pore scale, that will affect the performance at the reservoir scale. So one need to look at the pore scale behavior. Okay. Then the flow is not always transient, the flow is not always steady, and you have a lot of instabilities coming into it. The interfaces are disturbed. So modeling the waves on interfaces, deformable bubbles and droplets, that is also a problem. Now, the other thing is turbulence particle interaction. So turbulence in itself is a very difficult problem, and when you combine it with another difficult problem, which is particles or multi-phase flow, then how does turbulence affect, or how does the particle turbulence interaction affect the generation or dissipation of turbulence? That is also a challenging problem. So there are a lot of challenges in modeling multi-phase flow, but then that's what gives us our bread and butter, and when we have problems, then only we can solve them. Okay, so let us look at the conservation equations that we always use in fluid mechanics. So these are the familiar mass and momentum conservation equations. So let us remind ourselves the basic assumptions in all this, that we have continuum hypothesis, meaning that even though the fluid is made up of molecules, we can treat it as okay.
No problem.
I don't have any control over it.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Okay, so we were talking about continuum hypothesis, that the Knudsen number, or the distance between the molecules, is very small when we compare the length scale, when we compare with the length scale of the system, or the mean free path of the molecules is very small when we compare it with the length scale of the system. Okay, so this is basically mass conservation equation and momentum conservation equation. So I will just try to remind that this is basically Newton's second law of motion in control volume formulation, and so this is what we call acceleration, or convective plus transient term. So this is convective acceleration and the unsteady term, and that is equal to the forces that act on a control volume. So this is where we group all the body forces. Generally we get gravity in the body, and then surface forces, pressure and viscous terms, they come in these two terms. So this is a system of partial differential equations, and the problem is that this partial differential equation is non-linear. The second term, where we have velocity vectors being multiplied, so that is the non-linear term. So it is very difficult to solve this system of equations, except in certain cases where we are able to get rid of this convective term. So the practice has become that these partial differential equations are complex problems. They can be solved numerically, and that's what we call computational fluid dynamics. When we are looking at any problem, apart from these equations, we also need to think about the boundary conditions. So the two common boundary one common boundary condition what we look at is boundary condition at the wall, as we discussed in the previous slide, which is no slip, that there is no slip between a solid surface and the fluid over it. So if the solid surface is stationary, the fluid velocity on the solid surface will be 0. If the solid surface is moving, the fluid velocity will be equal to the velocity of the solid surface. What I am talking about, of course, is the tangential velocity, or the velocity tangential to the surface. The normal velocity will depend on if the surface is porous or non-porous. Okay. And then if you are looking at that the flow is turbulent, then we will not be able to model the system with these until we are doing DNS, what is called direct numerical simulations, and you are able to capture on the all the time and length scales, because turbulence can go to the largest possible scale to the smallest scale, what we call Kolmogorov scale. So that is also an issue, or also one usually used, especially for industrial purposes. One generally look into Reynolds average Navier-Stokes equations, where one look at mean velocity. So, for example, say V mean, and another term, what is called rho V dash, a tensor kind of, or a stress tensor kind of term, which is called Reynolds stress, comes into this equation. Okay, so this is just basic Navier-Stokes equation that we all have studied. Now I will also just briefly introduce for those who do not know what is computational fluid dynamics. So very simple introduction to computational fluid dynamics. So if you look at a problem, then first you will find that what is my control volume, or what is the region in which I would like to analyze the flow, or in which I would like to model the flow. So we identify this region, create a geometry of this using a CAD software, and then write down the governing equations. So by writing down governing equations, I mean that we can solve mass and momentum. Plus, if there is heat transfer, we need to solve energy conservation equations. If there is mass transfer, we need to also look into, or we also need to include concentration terms, and write down the appropriate boundary conditions. So basically, we identify the region of interest, boundary conditions, and the physics that is associated with the problem. Once we have done that, then we, let us say the blue region in this image is the region, or the rectangular region that we have identified. Now the next step is to divide this region into fixed number of control volumes. These can be, if in 2D, then these can be rectangular or triangular. If in 3D, they can be hexahedral, tetrahedral, or prism, etc. So these small control volumes is what we call mesh or grid, and on the center or centroid of it, or on the nodes of these grids, one can. So what is done, or what this is called process of discretization, right? So what is done that now from we assume that this is continuum, and then we are looking at this continuous. Let us discretize it. So again, treat this system as discrete. So we integrate in, or we discretize basically the partial differential equations in and obtain the algebraic equations. So the partial differential equation using one of these techniques, so finite volume, finite difference, or finite element method. These partial differential equations are discretized. So what that does, it the partial differential equations, they are converted to algebraic equations. So once the partial differential equations has been done, converted to algebraic equations, then what you get is a system of linear algebraic equations. So one algebraic equation for each control volume. So you have a very large system of linear algebraic equations, and you solve these linear algebraic equations, and what you get is basically your when you solve those equations, you will get velocity and pressure. If you are also solving for energy, then you will get temperature. If you're solving for mass transfer also, then you will get concentration. Okay, so from these, so basically what you have you have obtained is all these and all those discrete points. You have obtained the velocity, pressure, and say temperature, concentration. Then from that, you can calculate any quantity of your interest. If you are looking for heat transfer, you can calculate Nusselt number, you can calculate wall shear stress, you can calculate drag force, you can calculate lift force, depending on the problem that you are looking at. So that was a bit of that what we do or how do we model single phase flow. So let us look at that. If we have two phases present, again we will look at a continuum. I mean, we will follow the continuum hypothesis and few more assumptions that I have listed down here, that we consider only incompressible flows. So most of the chemical engineering applications, we do not need to deal with very high velocities. So we can treat the gases also as incompressible. So gas liquid system, we can treat them incompressible, and the assumption is fairly good. The fluids are assumed to be Newtonian fluids, and in these systems of equations, we do not consider phase change, and the fluids are considered to be immiscible. The equations do not have viscous dissipation included. It was also not there in the. I mean, we don't need viscous dissipation until we have energy. So anyway, mass conservation equation is there, and then momentum conservation. So if you look at what we have here in each term, there is a subscript k, where k refers to the phase. Phase k might be 1, so phase 1, and k2 phase 2, because we are talking about two-phase flow. So what we have considered a general case that in phase 1 the fluid will have density ρ1, and each phase will have its own velocity. So v1 and v2 velocities. Similarly, it should be, I mean, there's a typo here, so it should be mu k, and a pressure field for each phase. So del pk, that will be the generic equation. Now when we talk about two phases, there is another boundary that comes into picture, which is what we call interface. So that is a small boundary that, or a very thin boundary that separates the two fluids. So what I have drawn here, that two fluids, one by represented by a green, a blue color, and the other one with a yellow color. This is a small or a very thin surface, or it's a 2D surface. So we need to also consider what will be the boundary conditions on this surface. So we will have kinematic conditions that for velocity. So the velocity, we can look at the components. The velocity normal to the interface. So if there is no phase change, then the velocity in fluid 1 at the interface and velocity in fluid 2 at the interface, they will be equal. And that will be basically equal to the velocity of the interface. So that's what I have written, v1 dot m is equal to v2 dot m. Now, if you talk about the tangential velocity, so because of continuity of tangential velocity, so the velocity on the two sides of the interface, v1 and v2, will also be equal. Now, to dynamic conditions. So for stresses, how do we look into the how do we look at the stresses at the interface? So there will be a jump in the stress. What we commonly know is surface tension, because we have already assumed that the fluids are immiscible. So surface tension is present here. In the miscible fluid, of course, the surface tension will be 0. So in a direction normal to the interface, we will have a normal pressure or jump in the normal stress, which is equal to sigma kappa. So if you look at here, I have included P1 and P2, which is pressures, and the normal component of the stresses, viscous stresses, if there is any. So this equation basically represents that the jump or the difference in the normal stresses at the interface is equal to sigma kappa. Sigma is surface tension and kappa is curvature of the interface. Okay, so now that is for the normal stress. If we talk about the tangential stress, if the surface tension is constant, then this term will be zero. The gradient of surface tension will be zero. So until there is any Marangoni effect which causes gradient in surface tension that may be caused by change in temperature or a temperature gradient at the interface, or because of the surfactant present at the interface, tau 1 will be equal to tau 2 if there is no surface tension gradient. If there is surface tension gradient, then of course tau 1 minus tau 2 will be equal to the gradient of the surface tension. So that's how we model the boundary conditions at the interface, or we look at the boundary. So these are the fairly generic equations for two-phase flows. Now, there are different techniques or different approaches people adopt to model these system of equations. So one, what I have given the name here is what is called DNS for multi-phase flows. Now this term is generally reserved for turbulent flows. When you think about turbulent flows, it's that if you are able to model all the length and time scales in the turbulent flows for a problem, then we call that direct numerical simulations. We have not assumed anything. There is no heuristic assumption involved, and they are fairly accurate if done correctly. But this requires a lot of resources. So in an analogy with turbulent flow, one can do that if you do not assume any interactions, any forces, and if you are able to model all the scales, then what is called such models can be called DNS or direct numerical simulations of multi-phase flows. Now, in context of multi-phase flow, this refers to that you can resolve the interface correctly. So think of a bubble column reactor where you might have millions of bubbles, and resolving these bubbles is a daunting task even with the supercomputers we have in today's era. So one might need to look at the closure models for the post-grain. But in such cases where, let us say, if you are talking about, say, micro reactors and in the Taylor flow regime, or any separated flow, for example, stratified flow, then one can capture the interface correctly. So there are different methods which can be used to capture the interface, and two names have been given. One is called interface capturing method and interface tracking method. So in that interface tracking method is that you have an interface and you track the evolution of that interface, whereas interface capturing method is one is solving for a color function and one can capture the interface in the simulations, but it's not being tracked, that it's not, you are not marking the evolution of the interface. So in such cases, one need to solve an additional equation for a marker function. So let us see what is this marker function, because in two-phase flows, if we are modeling, if we are in phase 1, we can model the equations for phase 1. If we are in phase 2, we can model the equations for phase 2. The question comes, how do we know when we are in phase 1 and phase 2? And that's what is decided by a marker function. Now, this slide is about the interfaces. So interfaces we have already talked about, that the interface can be described by a single valued function. So you can define it with a curve if you are talking about 2D system, or if you are talking about a 3D system, then you need two coordinates. You basically need to define it using a surface. So now this interface can be identified by a marker function. So what is marker function? let us say you define a Markov function which is 1 in a fluid and 0 in another fluid. So the motion of this Markov function or can be tracked by this equation or by this advection equation, that del C over del T plus V dot del C is equal to 0. So because the identity of this fluid particle remains same, so this material derivative of it is 0. Now, this is how we can track the interface. So if we know what I said, that we can talk about or we can solve the equations for phase 1 or phase 2 depending on which phase we are. So we need to know which phase we are, and this is what Markov function will tell us, that if C is equal to 1, we are in phase 1. If C is equal to 0, we are in phase 2. Now, the only thing comes into picture that now what we need to do about the interface. So, and what will be happening, how do we incorporate the pressure jump or the stress jump at the interface. So one need to look at the interface also and find the topology of the interface. So the curvature of the interface can be found using this formula K is equal to del dot N. If you remember, we had this pressure jump is equal to sigma kappa. So kappa can be found del dot N, and N can be found from the Markov function. So gradient of Markov function del C divided by its magnitude, you get the unit normal to the interface. So basically, it is one fluid approach, and when you are modeling two-phase flows, but you consider only one system of equations. So if you look at, we have again come back to Navier-Stokes equation, mass conservation, momentum conservation equations with an additional term, which is what we have FSV here. Now the question you can ask me that what is this rho and mu? Rho is equal to rho1 and mu is equal to mu1, or rho is equal to rho2 and mu is equal to mu2. So how do we decide it? And I will say that if you know what is Markov function, if you know C is equal to 1, then you can say rho is equal to rho1. If you say C is equal to 2, then you can say rho is equal to rho2. And same for viscosity. Okay. So we need to solve an additional equation for the Markov function. That's what we say. Saw that del C over del T plus V dot del C is equal to 0. So depending on what do you use as a Markov function, different techniques have been developed. Okay, so let's look at some of the techniques. Before we do that, let us just discuss how do we define surface tension. So we saw that additional term in the momentum conservation equation, which was FSV. So FSV is equal to sigma kappa unit normal into delta. So delta is Dirac delta function. Now, if you think about surface tension force it acts only at the interface. It does not act in fluid 1 or fluid 2. If we go back to our system of equations, these are all body forces, or they are defined for control volume per unit volume. So how do we incorporate this in the surface force in this system of equations? So what is done is, it is multiplied by a function which is called Dirac delta function, and this Dirac delta function is only non-zero at the interface. Everywhere else it is 0. Okay, so this force will be 0 everywhere else except at the interface. And kappa, we have already seen how can we calculate kappa, how can we calculate N if we know Markov function. Sigma is surface tension basically. So we can calculate or we can incorporate in the system of equations the boundary conditions. Now the question comes, how do we define Markov functions? So this Markov function can be defined using different techniques, but depending on that, It's called volume of fluid method, level set method, or phase field, or other different methods, say front tracking method. Now, volume of fluid method is a very simple concept where they say that the color function is volume fraction of one of the phases. So volume fraction, if you are in phase 1, the volume fraction of phase 1 alpha 1 is equal to 1 in that place or in that cell in that volume, and the volume fraction of other phase will be 0. So your color function basically is volume fraction of one of the phase. Now this gives you an inherent advantage that when you solve a volume fraction, it is also mass conservation for one phase. So the mass of phases is inherently conserved in this method. Now the question that might come that you talked about that in phase 1 rho is equal to rho 1, in phase 2 rho is equal to rho 2. What happens at the interface? So the formulation is done in such a manner that rho is equal to rho 1 alpha 1 plus rho 2 alpha 2. So at the interface you will get the average of this depending on what is alpha. But everywhere else, because either alpha 1 will be 0 or alpha 2 will be 0, so you will have rho is equal to rho 1 or rho is equal to rho 2 depending on which phase you are in. Okay. Now, one of the things, one of the problems in this method or almost all the methods that we have is that the interface is diffused. So the interface is not the smooth one, it is diffused over few cells. So the interface in reality we see very thin interface. It is not thin, it will be at least 1 or 2 grid cells thick. Okay. And the other problem is that we are defining here C is equal to 0 or C is equal to 1. So if this is, if in what is the actual configuration, it's shown in figure A. But what you will get is basically the values in each cells. So you may get that in this cell, the value is equal to say 0.1. So you do not know that where is it? It is vertically here or in horizontally somewhere here. So then you need to decide another technique that what should be the orientation of the interface in this, and that is what a lot of efforts is required. So that is what is called interface reconstruction technique. So I have given you just a small introduction to interface reconstruction, but if one is interested, one can follow some of these papers, Hart and Nicholas or Young's, which are very old papers, and there are new techniques or more advanced techniques which have been developed where one can even match the interface in the two cells. Okay. One of the problems that one observed in the simulations using volume of fluid method or any other method is what is called spurious currents. So if you model two-phase flow, if you have a surface and there is a droplet sitting in with 0 velocities, and when one do simulations and plot vectors, there are some fluctuating velocities which are unphysical, and that's why they are called spurious or parasitic currents. These comes because of the discretization, because of the some imbalance between the surface tension and pressure gradients. So a lot of effort has gone into minimizing these spurious currents or eliminate these spurious currents. Another technique where one can look at or where one can use a different marker, which is called level set method. So level set method is basically it measures the shortest distance from the interface. So if you have an interface and at this point the phi will be this distance from the interface, and this is along with sign. So let us say in phase 1 this is positive, and in phase 2 this is negative, and at the interface this distance function will be 0. So you have any this is an initial value formation. That means that initially you should have some interface, and then one again solves for the advection of this interface, but when you advect it, you get the topology of the interface correctly, but the mass may not remain conserved. So one need to reinitialize every few time steps, every few iterations, one need to reinitialize this system of equations. This is a very powerful technique, and one the calculation of the normals, etc., is very accurate in this formulation. So, but what it suffers from is mass loss. So it needs to be reinitialized every time. So whereas in the volume of fluid method, the mass is inherently conserved. So people use the combination of two, what is called coupled level set and volume fraction, CLS-VOF method. Okay. So once one has calculated L phi, which is level set function, and from that one can calculate the bulk properties, or from that one can calculate what is alpha using this formulation. And once you have calculated alpha using the previous formulas, one can calculate density and viscosity. So these methods, of course, they can model the flow phenomena very accurately. One of the problems will come when one talk about contact line singularity, which we just discussed. So there is a three-phase contact, and then one need to look at, or one need to model that how to adjust contact line singularity. Then if there is three-phase contact, then one also need to look at the dynamic contact angle, because the contact angle might be changing. So that should be taken into account. Then when you model such things, you also need to think about that when in some cases the films might be very thin. So how do you capture these films? How do you capture the breakup phenomena and coalescence phenomena? So there has been a lot of progress in this, and people have been able to model these phenomena very accurately. About few weeks ago, say 2-3 weeks ago, there have been a video that has been circulating in in WhatsApp and Facebook, etc., that there somebody did an experiment. There was a water-filled balloon and a basket and the bottom of it, and somebody pins the balloon and the liquid drops down, and there is a small, a very symmetric jet forms. And then if you look at on social media, LinkedIn, etc., somebody has been able to model such systems fairly accurately. So the power of these techniques is quite good, or a lot of progress has been made in such cases. Now, when one talk about heat and mass transfer in such systems, one also need to think about the boundary layers that will develop at the interface. So developing boundary layers and looking at the flow and heat transfer aspects is also a challenge. Then if one is looking at, say, phase change modeling, so incorporating the phase change terms, that are other issues. So there's a lot of work that is being done. I have just given a small glimpse or small introduction to the system of equations here. Now, as I said, that when you want to model one single bubble, you need about 15 to 20 grid points to capture a bubble accurately. So you are looking at, if you want to model it in 3D, you need 20 by 20 by 20, so about 8,000 grid points to capture one bubble. And if you want to capture millions of such bubbles, so you are looking at a mass which is, say, 8,000 million if you want to capture 1 million of bubbles. So that is a very difficult task to do. So and even if it is possible, it will take enormous time handling enormous data. So there is another technique which has been developed, or another system of equations which have been developed, where one use averaged equations. So we will use these equations. So I will try to finish it in let us say next half an hour. So let us look at these the approaches. So two different approaches can be used. One is Euler approach and another one is Euler-Lagrangian approach. Now Euler a Lagrangian approach we will not be talking about today here, but in the Euler-Lagrangian approach, what is we might remember from our fluid mechanics classes, that Euler description, when we look at a control volume, we are not concerned with the motion of a fluid particle, but we are concerned with a stationary region or one region which is moving with a constant velocity. So we are looking at a fixed volume and we look at what is coming in and going out. So that's what we call Euler formulation. Lagrangian formulation, on the other hand, is that if we take a fluid particle and follow its motion everywhere, then that is Lagrangian approach. But in fluid mechanics, we generally tend to use Eulerian description because we are not interested in the motion of a fluid particle, but we are interested in the motion of fluid particle in a certain region. For example, around a car, around an aeroplane, around a sphere, or in a process vessel, in a reactor, in a heat exchanger, and so on. So the Euler-Lagrangian approach is that when you want to model, say, gas solid flows, the gas can be solved using Eulerian approach, whereas the motion of particles can be solved using a Lagrangian approach. So if you consider these as point particles, you will just need very small computations, because once you calculate the velocity field, you can calculate the forces on the particles, solve equation of motion, m dv by dt is equal to the force, drag and lift of other forces being applied on the particles. But if you are looking at modeling this in detail, where the particle size are non-negligible, concentrations are large, then people model what is called DEM, discrete element method, and then combined with fluid flow, so what is called CFD DEM method. So we are not going to talk about all those things here. What we will be talking about Euler description, so which is basically that you are modeling the two phases together, or both the phases, dispersed phase as well as continuous phase, using a Euler description. Okay. So for that, what is done, the equations that we discussed, they can be volume average. The averaging of the system of equations is done. So the description will change like this. If you look at the pictorial view, in a continuous phase, which is, say, shown in blue color here, and there's a dispersed phase which is shown in the red color. Now, this is what we saw in the previous methods, say volume of fluid method, that we can capture the bubbles, etc. But in the Euler description, we will not be able to identify the interfaces. So what we can say that in a particular cell, this is my alpha. It might be 0.1, 0.9, 0.5. So I will not be able to identify the interfaces. So that's what we call average model. So, but still it gives a lot of useful information, and it is, in most of the cases, it can be sufficient to model the reactors, or at least that's what people have done until now. Okay, so in what I have shown here on this slide is volume averaged equations. So you have one equation. Of course, if you are modeling, say, for two phases or three phases, alpha 1 plus alpha 2 is equal to 1. That's pretty obvious. Then we have mass conservation equations. K is a subscript for each phase. So we are solving one equation for each phase. And in this, on the right hand side, there is one term, gamma k, which refers to mass transfer across the interface. If there is no phase change, then this term will become 0. Then there is momentum conservation. So you have convective acceleration, transient terms here, then pressure term. So pressure here we have Pk still, but we will see that one of the assumptions we will make that the pressure in both the spheres, or both the fields, both the liquids say at the same pressure field. Then we have viscous stressage, body force term, and then one additional term which is momentum transfer across the interface. So how the momentum is being transferred across the interface. If you remember, we talked about the dynamic boundary conditions. So how does that come into picture in this? That is what the crux of this will be. So one of the things, before we talk about those things, let us see the system of equations. So we had in two-phase flows, we had 8 partial differential equations, 1 mass conservation and 3 momentum conservation equations. Then alpha 1 plus alpha 2 is equal to 1. And the 3 momentum jump conditions. So momentum jump conditions is what we have mk. So one in each direction. So we need the closure equations for each. Now we have 12 equations altogether. Now we have variables, that 2 volume fractions, alpha 1, alpha 2, 6 velocity components. If we assume only 1 pressure field, so 1 for pressure field and 6 momentum transfer terms. So we will have total 15 variables. So we need 3 closure equations to close this system of equations. So now this system, closing this system of equations is where we brought some, or where we bring some empiricism. Apart from that, of course, when we did averaging, we have lost some details in terms of that some of the things that will not be able to capture in terms of length scales or time scales. Okay. So one of the simplest model is that you assume that this is homogeneous model. So homogeneous model, that there is one velocity field. So that means V1 is equal to V2. So you will have V1x is equal to V2x and so on. So you will have less 3 variables, or you can say that 3 more equations, and you have solved the problem. Okay. So this is the simplest possible model. It is almost like single phase flow, single field Navier-Stokes equations. And this will work well if your particle size is very small, if the particles move with the fluid velocity, or if the phases are well separated. And so if you think of, if you look the equations in volume of fluid method, that's what you have. Okay. Then another thing, or the next step, is what is called algebraic slip model. So where one assumes there is a relative velocity, or there is certain amount of slip between the phases. So one can use algebraic slip model, and one will need an equation or empirical equation to model the relative velocity between the phases. Then the Euler model, where one can model the system of equations, and to close this mk, one need to consider all the interaction forces between the particles. So that might be a drag force, it might be a lift force, virtual mass force, turbulent dispersion force, or history force. So these are all the forces. If you are looking at the microscopic view, you will have a you will be able to obtain this using volume of fluid method inherently from your method. But in such cases, you will need to include the equations. So drag force, we all know that the drag can be in terms of caused by differences in pressure, so form drag, or viscous stressage, so friction drag, and one can define the drag force in terms of drag coefficient. So now the question comes, how, where, and VR is the relative velocity between the two phases. Now one needs to model in this case what is CD, and that's where you bring the empiricism. So if you consider a rigid spherical particle, we have fairly good or fairly accurate expressions what I have shown here, but then there is interaction between the phases, so the drag will change if there is interaction, particle-particle interaction. The other one particle affect the flow field of another particle. Then the effect of turbulence, etc. They may also cause the drag on the particle, change in the drag in particles. Okay. The particles may not be completely spherical, so that's also another issue. Then virtual mass force. So virtual mass force, so when a particle is moving, it carries along with it some fluid which is surrounding it. So fluid surrounding an accelerating particle that moves with it. So the mass or the apparent mass of the particles appears more than what it is. So that's why we call it virtual mass or added mass force. So that can be given using this term. And again, the constant in CVM can be taken as 0.5 for an isolated spherical particles, or using this equation for multiple bubbles. Then lift force. So we know that lift force, drag force acts in the direction of the flow, along the direction of the flow, whereas lift force acts normal to the flow direction, and that can be caused by different regions. So it can be a very common or very popular effect when we talk about, say, cricket or tennis balls. So a rotating ball, there is, because the ball is rotating, the velocity at the top will be omega r plus v, where velocity at the bottom will be v minus omega r. So because of the velocity difference, there will be a net pressure acting on the ball, and there will be a lift acting on it. Then there can be lift because of a shear gradient over the sphere. So that is what is called Safman force. And so for a sphere which is rotating plus which has a shear rate along it, that means the flow is not uniform. So then the lift force can be given with this formula. Now again, in this equation, so Vc and Vd refers to the velocity in the continuous phase and the dispersed phase. Cl is the lift force. Lift coefficient. So then one need closure for Cl, and the expressions for Cl, which can be function of Reynolds number, bond number, which is a ratio of surface tension and gravity, and then vorticity induced Reynolds number. So there is a lot of heuristic models present there. Now, once we have developed models, we have done some simulations. How do we go and say that, look, what I have done is correct? Because when somebody has done some experiments, or somebody has looked into things, somebody has done some measurements, then they appear credible, or their credibility is good. But when you are doing modeling, you need to establish their credibility, their veracity, by comparing it with the previous literature, by comparing with analytical solution where available, or comparing with the experimental data. So we are talking about here because we can obtain the velocity field at every point. We can obtain the volume fraction at every point. So what we will be looking at here, the techniques which can give us the same amount of information. So you might have heard from in the previous talks about say radio tracer applications from Professor Avinash as well as Pant sir. Yeah. So radio tracer based experiments can give us the volume fraction using gamma ray densitometry, or velocity field using radioactive particle tracking, or particle image velocimetry can be used to obtain local velocity. Volume fraction, one can also use say electrical capacitance tomography, electrical resistance tomography, or electrical say inductance tomography, or combinedly together electrical impedance tomography. I will just give a brief introduction what is particle image velocimetry. So particle image velocimetry, as the name suggests, that you measure the velocity of particles. So how do you measure it? You take the images of these. So when you want to take images, of course, you need a camera. And when you want to take good images, you remember the old days when you go to a studio and they will put two halogen lamps surrounding you, or even in the cameras you have a flashlight. So one of the challenges there that you take images that the lighting should be good. So in such cases, you need a laser, generally a laser light. So a double pulse laser, which hits the or which emits the light at two known time instants. So you take the images of the flow at time t1 and time t1 plus delta t. Once you have taken the images of the flow and this flow is seeded with the particles. So when you seed flow with the particles and the image is taken basically of the particles. So the question comes that how do I make sure that the particle is following flow faithfully? So the one of the assumptions in this and even in RPT is that the particle should follow flow faithfully. So the particle should be non-buoyant. That means the particle density and fluid density should be same. Plus the particle size should be so small that the particle follows the flow faithfully, or the response time of the particle to the flow is very small when you compare it the characteristic time scale of the flow. So in such a case, you take images of the particles at time t plus delta t, and then if you are able to correlate the two images using say cross correlation, then you will be able to obtain the displacement of the particles. So once you obtain delta x, and you already know what is delta t, so you will be able to obtain delta x over delta t for the velocity of the particles. So that's what particle image velocimetry is. Of course, you need a light source, which is a laser, a lens. So a laser generally emits a cylindrical light, and using a cylindrical lens, it is converted into light sheet. So a particular plane in your vessel, in your reactor, will be illuminated, and you can measure velocity. Now, most of the reactors that we will come across in chemical engineering will have particles or bubbles which are opaque. So if you are talking about a bubble column reactor, even if your system is transparent, because of the particles or because of the bubbles, you will not be able to take the pictures inside the system. So you need a technique which can work very well in opaque systems. That's where the radioactive particle tracking comes into picture. So radioactive particle tracking, you have a small, you have a tracer particle, which is a radioactive material, and surrounding the reactor you have detectors. Before you do the experiments, you put your tracer particles at different locations in the reactor, so you know that what is the photon count received by these detectors, and you make a table. Once you have made a table, and then you start the experiments and put this tracer particle. Again, the assumption is that this tracer particle is such that it follows the fluid faithfully. So once this tracer particle goes everywhere inside the reactor, and you are obtaining the signals at different time instants. So once you obtain this data, you compare it with the lookup tables which you have prepared beforehand and try to find what was the location of this particle. Okay, so once you have obtained the location and you know time difference between the two, so you are able to obtain the velocity field. Once you obtain the velocity field, you can obtain the fluctuations, you can obtain turbulent kinetic energy, and so on and so forth. Okay. Gamma ray densitometry is again a radiation-based technique. So where one is looking at there's a radioactive particle source, and from that particle source, from the radioactive source, there is aligned with it, there is a detector. So that detector basically Beer-Lambert's law, where the strength on photon count will depend on that this radiation passes through liquid phase or gas phase or liquid phase or solid phase. So the attenuation coefficient is different in different fluids. So based on that, one can obtain that what is the fraction of phase 1 or fraction of phase 2. So this technique, gamma ray densitometry, will give you a line average, or in this case, say a chordal average volume fraction. And you can traverse it at different locations, horizontally or vertically. So you will be able to obtain the volume fraction at different locations, at a plane, and at different planes in the reactor. So I will just briefly talk about this. So some of the applications that we have been looking at IIT Guwahati, or I have been looking at once, since I started my PhD. So this is the modeling of a Taylor flow, where the Taylor flow is very regular. If you remember, when we talked about microreactors, I showed you some flow regimes. So where there is bubbles of the size of the reactor. So when you have bubbles, the bubbles are of the size of the reactor and they are periodic. So the good thing about periodic flow is that if you model one periodic unit, you can model that. You can say that you can extrapolate the same results for the entire system. So what we did here is we looked at one periodic unit. We took a bubble and slugs surrounding it, and used periodic boundary conditions on the entrance and exit of this periodic unit. Because if we are modeling in the laboratory frame of reference, of course the process is transient. But if we sit on the bubble, then it becomes a steady problem. So our problem is reduced further. So what we did is model a flow in a periodic unit in a bubble frame of reference, and we used volume of fluid method. The film surrounding these bubbles is very small. So to capture these films, we needed to make sure that the near wall resolution of the mass is very good. So, and fortunately, we had alongside some experimentalists doing the experiments, who were doing the experiments for the hydrodynamics as well as heat transfer. So we were able to compare some of these things. So if you look at these pictures, which compares the shape of the bubble, the black and white image, or the half image black and white, that shows the shape of the bubble that is obtained from the experiments, whereas the image on the left side in color shows that is obtained from the modeling. So that looks pretty good. That is for water nitrogen system. The other experiments we did with a different system, where we had ethylene glycol and nitrogen, and this is where what we have. If I take the interface in one half and plot it on an XY plot, that's what we have. This is Y coordinate and this is X coordinate, where this is my X direction and this is Y direction. This is Y direction and this is X direction. So the interface has been compared, and one of these, the dotted line is obtained from the experiments, and the solid line are from the from CFD simulations. So again, pretty good match for another system. On these graphs, what we have plotted is Nusselt number enhancement. So Nusselt number enhancement for two-phase flow over single-phase fully developed flow. Now, one thing that you can see by looking at this scale itself, that there is pretty good enhancement for some cases, at least up to 3 times. So single phase laminar flow for a constant Wall-Heat flux boundary condition, you have a Nusselt number of 4.36. So in some cases, we have been able to obtain a Nusselt number of about 12. Okay. The other thing is that it has been compared, the solid symbols are from experiments, whereas the open symbols or the hollow symbols are from CFD simulations, and there is pretty good match between the two. So this is one example where we have been able to model and validate using volume of fluid model the flow and heat transfer in a micro system or in a micro reactor. Another example is a core annular flow, a small project which we did to understand the flow of heavy oil. So this is liquid flow. The black thing here is, or the black, this is heavy oil, and surrounding it is water. I mean, this core annular flow is pretty useful in terms of transportation of a viscous liquid, because one can reduce the viscous stresses on the wall of the channels. Okay. So I will just skip these techniques for modeling of state tank reactors, and I will go just slightly just discuss this the flow behavior in a state tank reactor. So some work that we did that is actually going on right now in our group. So where we are looking at the flow behavior, single phase as well as two phase behavior in a state tank reactor. So this is for a Ruston turbine, the flow pattern using a Ruston turbine, and some comparison with the literature. Now this is two phase flow for the same system. This is we have a bubble column reactor, but not a normal column, where here we have a what is called a baffled reactor, and on top of that we also oscillate this baffled reactor. So this is oscillatory baffled reactor. If you are using it for other purposes, not as a reactor, then it is also called pulsed sieve plate column. So in this we are looking at a small system, and we introduce baffles in between. So we are trying to understand the hydrodynamics of single phase liquid as well as gas liquid systems in this. So that's all. I will be happy to take questions.
Any questions from the participants? I have one question from my side also, because you have taken for density, I think you have taken some alpha, some fraction, right? Something?
Yeah, yeah.
So how to define that in the multiphase at the interface actually?
Yeah, so at the interface it is alpha 1 rho 1 plus alpha 2 rho 2, because when we are modeling the interface, is actually not a thin interface. It is alpha, I mean the interface is slightly thicker. So you will have at the interface, you will when you go in fluid 1 and 2 fluid 2, you will have the interface varying. So at the interface you will have alpha is equal to 0.5, alpha is equal to 0.9. So depending on that alpha, you will have the density. Same, actually the formula is for the interface itself.
Okay, but my question is that how to define that alpha actually, from where that alpha will come?
Yeah, so alpha is volume fraction of phase 1. So okay, so you have the volume, I mean this alpha in volume of fluid method, you have alpha volume fraction of the phase. So when you start your simulation, you know that you define that this is my this is my bubble, and in this region alpha is equal to 1, everywhere in the liquid phase alpha is equal to 0. And once you start solving, you solve an additional equation del alpha over del T plus V dot del alpha is equal to 0, which basically convects your volume fraction. Or in a way that is also a mass conservation for one phase.